This all started in the final stretch of summer when my family decided to take a break from the city's relentless heat and noise. We rented a small lake house tucked away on the edge of a dense forest, miles from anywhere familiar. The plan was simple: escape the chaos, relax by the water, and just enjoy some quiet time together before the school year began. I'd only ever been to lakeside cabins before, but this place felt different, somehow older, more isolated. My parents assured me it was safe, just a little rustic, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled deep in my chest as we drove down the narrow dirt road that led to the house. The first day passed without incident. We unpacked, swam in the lake, and cooked dinner over a fire pit out back. The lake was stunning, still, almost too still, with thick trees crowding the shoreline so tightly the water looked like a black mirror reflecting an endless wall of green. At night, the air cooled sharply, and the sounds of the forest came alive: frogs croaking, insects buzzing, and the distant call of an owl. It was peaceful, almost hypnotic. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed something odd: shadows flickering just beyond the treeline, shapes that didn't quite belong. By the second night, things began to feel off. I was lying in bed in the small upstairs bedroom, the window cracked open to let in the cool breeze. Just before I drifted to sleep, I heard it, a faint tapping, like someone running their fingers along the wooden siding outside. I told myself it was probably a branch brushing in the wind or an animal moving through the underbrush. But then the tapping grew louder, more deliberate, and I caught a glimpse of a dark figure standing motionless at the edge of the clearing, watching the house. When I blinked, it was gone. I shared what I'd seen with my parents over breakfast, but they brushed it off as my imagination running wild, the product of too many horror movies. My little brother was too busy tossing bread to the ducks to notice, and I was left feeling more alone in that cabin than I had all summer. As the day wore on, strange things kept happening. Items would vanish from the kitchen: my dad's fishing lure, my mom's sunglasses, and then reappear in odd places, like tucked under a couch cushion or hanging from a tree branch outside. The air inside the house would suddenly turn icy cold, even though the sun was shining brightly, and I caught faint whispers just beyond hearing, like the wind carrying words I couldn't quite make out. That evening, as we sat around the fire pit roasting marshmallows, an old man from a neighboring cabin stopped by. He introduced himself as Mr. Harlan and warned us about the lake's past. According to local lore, decades ago, a tragedy had unfolded here. A family much like ours had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and warnings. People said the lake was haunted by something dark, a restless presence that lingered beneath the still waters and in the shadows of the trees. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, but thanked him politely and sent him on his way. I, however, was fixated. The stories made the strange occurrences feel less like coincidences and more like warnings. That night, the atmosphere grew heavier. The house felt smaller, the walls closing in with an unseen pressure. I lay awake listening, the tapping returning, this time accompanied by soft footsteps pacing just outside my window. The whispers came again, clearer now, but the words were jumbled and fragmented, as if spoken in a language that twisted and turned through time. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the growing dread in my gut told me otherwise. The next day, I explored the perimeter of the property, trying to find a rational explanation for the noises and shadows. Around the back of the house, near the lake's edge, I stumbled upon an old, weathered sign half buried in the dirt. The paint was faded, but I could just make out the words, "Beware the depths." Below the warning, a crude carving of a face stared out, its eyes hollow and haunting. It looked ancient, like something left behind by generations long gone. I showed it to my parents, but they dismissed it as a relic of some forgotten prank. Despite their reassurances, the unease only deepened. That afternoon, I caught sight of a shadowy figure standing across the lake, watching us from the tree line. When I blinked, it was gone again. My family didn't see it, and when I pointed it out, they told me to stop imagining things. But the feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin. As night fell, the house grew colder still. The flickering shadows seemed to creep closer, and the whispers turned into low moans that rattled the windows. I stayed close to my parents, but even their presence couldn't chase away the dark weight pressing down on the cabin. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the vanished family Mr. Harlan had told us about, and the warnings hidden in that old sign. At some point during the night, I heard it again, the tapping. This time, it came from beneath the floorboards in the living room. I crept downstairs, heart pounding, and knelt by the floor, tracing the sound to a loose panel near the fireplace. The noise stopped as soon as I moved the board aside, revealing nothing but dust and empty space below. I felt a chill creep down my spine and quickly replaced the panel. The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless tossing and turning, every creak of the house making me jump. When dawn finally broke, I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping the morning would bring calm. But as I looked out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a trail of muddy footprints leading from the water's edge straight to our front door. I rushed outside to inspect, but the footprints abruptly stopped at the threshold. No one was there. I called my parents, but they were still asleep, and when they finally woke, they dismissed it as animal tracks or a trick of the light. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the edge of our little world, watching, waiting. That day, a heavy fog rolled in over the lake, swallowing the shoreline and turning the world into a grey, silent void. The house felt even more isolated, trapped in a mist that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. We stayed inside, trying to distract ourselves with games and movies, but the oppressive quiet gnawed at us. Every creak, every sigh of the old cabin felt amplified, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. As evening approached, the whispers returned, this time from all directions at once. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block them out, but the voices only grew louder, filled with sorrow and warning. I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving across the fog outside, slender and impossibly tall, disappearing into the grey hedge. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, caught between fear and disbelief. My parents tried to comfort me, but their eyes betrayed their own growing unease. We all knew something was wrong. The lake house was no longer just a quiet retreat, it had become a trap, a place where the past reached out through shadows and whispers, pulling us into a story we never asked to be part of. As I write this, the sun is setting again, casting long, dark fingers over the water. The shadows are lengthening, and the tapping has started once more, faint but insistent, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. Whatever waits in the darkness beyond this house, it's close now. And I'm not sure we'll make it through the night. After the unsettling days at the lake house, my mind was still tangled in the shadows and whispers, but life dragged me back to a quieter, more familiar reality. Yet, even there, the strange and the terrifying seemed to find me. It began with a late summer evening in my suburban neighborhood, where the calm streets and familiar faces offered a deceptive sense of safety. It was a Thursday night when my phone buzzed for the first time. A call from an unknown number, no name, just a blank screen. I hesitated but answered, only to be met with silence, nothing but a faint static humming on the other end. I chalked it up to a prank or a wrong number and went back to scrolling through social media. But the calls didn't stop. They came every night, always late, always from that same unknown number. Sometimes silence, sometimes low, unintelligible whispers that sent a chill down my spine. I mentioned it to a few friends, brushing it off as a prank, but deep down, I felt the growing unease. The calls escalated after a week, turning from silent to threatening. One night, a voice, distorted and cold, whispered my name, and another time, a scratchy warning, "You are being watched." I tried blocking the number, changing my phone, even switching carriers, but the calls found me, relentless and invasive. Determined to find answers, I enlisted the help of two close friends, Jamie and Marcus. We started tracing the calls using a mixture of apps and old-school detective work, hoping to uncover the source. Our search led us through layers of dead-end numbers and burner phones until we stumbled upon something far more disturbing, a physical location. Following the clues, we found ourselves standing in front of an unassuming house on the edge of town, its windows dark and boarded up, the lawn overgrown and wild. The neighborhood kids whispered stories about the place, an old recluse's home, abandoned for years, but supposedly not empty. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, we decided to investigate. We waited until nightfall, the street lights flickering as we approached the house. The front door was locked, but a side window was cracked open just enough to slip through. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with dust, and the floorboards creaked under our feet. Flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and walls covered in strange symbols and scribbles that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. In the back room, we found a chilling shrine, a collection of photographs, letters, and personal items belonging to various local residents, including some of our classmates. The walls were plastered with newspaper clippings about missing persons and strange disappearances. The most unsettling discovery was a series of audio recordings, eerily similar to the calls I had been receiving, played on a loop from a battered tape player. The realization hit us hard. This was the lair of the person tormenting me, a stalker who had been watching and studying me for months. The thought that someone so close, yet so hidden, had been invading my privacy and threatening my life was terrifying. We quickly left, our hearts pounding, but the sense of being hunted didn't fade. Back home, the calls became more frequent and aggressive. The stalker began sending texts, cryptic messages, pictures taken from outside my window, and even threats aimed at my family and friends. The police were involved, but without concrete evidence, their help felt limited. I was forced to live in a state of constant vigilance, checking locks multiple times a night and avoiding going out alone. One night, after a particularly threatening call, Jamie and Marcus stayed over. We tried to keep spirits high, but the tension was palpable. Around midnight, the power flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. The phone rang repeatedly, each call more urgent and menacing than the last. Suddenly, a noise came from outside, a slow, deliberate scratching at the front door. We froze, barely daring to breathe. The scratching grew louder, followed by muffled voices whispering our names. Through the window, we caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure moving with unnatural speed, retreating into the night when the porch light flickered back on. The experience left us shaken, the line between fear and reality blurring. Determined not to be victims, we decided to gather evidence to expose the stalker. Over the next days, we mapped out patterns, collected recordings, and tried to piece together the identity of the person behind the terror. But every lead seemed to vanish, every clue slipped through our fingers like smoke. It felt as if the stalker was always one step ahead, watching and waiting. The paranoia seeped into every aspect of life. Friends stopped answering calls. School became a gauntlet of whispered rumors and sideways glances. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound. Sleep became a stranger, replaced by nightmares of dark figures lurking just beyond the light. Then, one evening, my phone rang again. This time, the voice was calm, almost casual. "You can't hide," it said. "We are always closer than you think." The line went dead, and I was left trembling, realizing that the nightmare wasn't just about me, it was about everyone I cared about. In a desperate bid for safety, I arranged a meeting with a local detective who had taken an interest in my case. She listened carefully to our story, promising to do everything she could. But as she warned me, without physical evidence, the stalker could remain hidden in the shadows, a ghost haunting the edges of our lives. The following days were a tense blur of police visits, security upgrades, and late-night stakeouts with Jamie and Marcus. We tried to reclaim a semblance of normalcy, but the invisible threat lingered, a dark cloud over every moment. Each time my phone vibrated with an unknown number, my heart skipped a beat. One afternoon, Jamie found a clue that gave us a flicker of hope, a scrap of paper dropped near the abandoned house, with a hastily scrawled name and address. It was a lead we hadn't considered, pointing to someone within our own town. We planned to investigate further, hoping to finally unmask the person who had turned our lives into a waking nightmare. But even as we prepared, the fear remained. The stalker was out there, somewhere in the shadows, watching our every move, waiting for the next moment to strike. The suburban streets, once a place of comfort, had become a maze of threats and secrets, and I knew that escaping this terror would take more than courage, it would take every ounce of strength we had left. That late summer, our group of friends, me, Lucas, Emily, and Sarah, decided to take a road trip before college pulled us in different directions. We aimed for a weekend adventure, nothing fancy, just a drive through the countryside with stops at quirky diners and scenic overlooks. The kind of trip that felt like freedom, like one last chance to escape the everyday before life grew complicated. But what started as light-hearted fun quickly spiraled into something far darker. Our first day was filled with laughter and music, the windows down as we cruised along winding roads. It was late afternoon when we spotted her, a young woman standing by the side of a deserted highway, thumb outstretched, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked tired but determined, and without much discussion, we pulled over. She introduced herself as Claire, saying she was heading north to visit family but had missed the last bus. Something about her made us uneasy, but we shrugged it off as nerves or exhaustion. Claire climbed in, and the car grew quieter, the easy chatter replaced by an uneasy silence. As the miles passed, strange things began to happen. Our phones lost signal sporadically, the GPS flickered and died, and the radio started picking up static-filled broadcasts that made no sense. Emily swore she saw Claire's eyes flash an unnatural shade of red in the rearview mirror, but when we asked, she just smiled and said it was just the light. That night, we stopped at a small-town motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and peeling paint. We thought the worst was behind us, but as we settled in, a sense of being watched crept over us. Strange noises echoed through the walls, whispers, footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of breathing in the darkness. Sarah swore someone was standing outside our door, but when we checked, no one was there. The next morning, Claire was gone. At first, we thought she had just left quietly, but then we found her abandoned backpack in the parking lot, the zipper partially open and contents scattered. Among her things was a worn journal filled with cryptic entries, names crossed out, strange symbols, and references to hunting and escaping. The more we read, the clearer it became that Claire was not just a stranded traveler but someone with a terrifying past. As we drove on, the atmosphere in the car grew heavier. Shadows seemed to flicker just beyond the tree line, and every time we glanced in the rearview mirror, we caught glimpses of a figure trailing us at a distance. The road trip we had envisioned was now a desperate flight from something unseen but deadly. One evening, as we stopped at a remote rest area, Lucas noticed a pair of headlights in the distance, slowly approaching. The car pulled up beside us, but when we looked, there was no driver. The lights flickered and vanished, leaving only the echo of an engine fading into the night. That was the moment we realized we were being hunted. Our attempts to call for help were thwarted by dead zones and dropped calls. The local authorities seemed either unwilling or unable to assist, their eyes full of pity but their voices dismissive. We felt trapped in a nightmare, the roads twisting and turning into an endless loop with no escape. One night, as we camped near an abandoned farmhouse, the figure finally made its move. We awoke to the sound of footsteps circling our tent, the fabric rustling as something or someone prowled close. Emily screamed as the zipper was yanked down, and a shadowy hand reached inside. We fought back with whatever we had, flashlights, sticks, anything to keep the darkness at bay. In the chaos, the figure vanished, leaving behind only chilling silence and the smell of damp earth. We packed up immediately, the urgency to escape overpowering our exhaustion. The road ahead was uncertain, but staying meant certain danger. As dawn broke, we made a pact never to ignore the signs again, never to trust strangers on the road without hesitation. The experience had changed us, etched a permanent scar in our memories. The late summer that was supposed to be carefree had become a battle for survival, a lesson in fear that none of us would forget. Now, whenever I drive past a hitchhiker or hear a story of a missing person, I think back to that trip, the shadowy figure, the empty eyes, and the silent threat that hunted us through the dark. The road is full of stories like ours, whispered warnings carried on the wind, and I know we were lucky to escape with our lives. But the memory lingers, a dark shadow stretching long and cold across the summer nights.